Few of the traders and other servants of the Dark Gods under the command of Abaddon understood his true purpose in assaulting Cadia. Most gave it little thought. For the dark prophets of the Wordbearers' Trader Legion, the fall of the Imperium was destiny, foretold by the Chaos Gods millennia before. For the Night Lords and others who reveled in suffering, this was the time when terror would rule. And for the Alpha Legion, this was but the latest stage in a plan stretching across centuries, no more or less vital than a dozen other conflicts. Abaddon's true goal, 10,000 years in the making, was to breach the Cadian Gate and destroy the alien pylons on Cadia itself that held back the warp tides of the Eye of Terror. The warp itself would erupt into real space from the Eye, along a line known as the Crimson Path. Its tendrils would spread into the heart of the Imperium and eventually engulf Terra itself. As this massive new warp rift spread across real space, the Despoiler's demonic allies would be able to manifest into reality more easily. Even the demon Primarchs of the Trader Legions would be able to exist in real space permanently. By moving slowly and carefully, Abaddon would accomplish what Horus could not: the destruction of the Imperium. Abaddon also had to keep his ultimate goals secret, even from many of his own forces. For once the Dark Gods knew what he intended, their fragile unity would dissolve, as each sought to claim the spoils of real space for their own. In the wake of the Blackstone Fortress Will of Eternity's destruction, the Imperial forces held a war council in what remained of the fortress city of Khazar-Craft's command bastion. The newly arrived Archmagos Belisarius Cawl outlined what he had learned. For millions of years, the pylons on Cadia and other worlds had prevented the Immaterium from breaking its bounds and consuming the galaxy. Abaddon had launched 12 prior Black Crusades, not because he was an incompetent leader, but as cover for his real goal of slowly obliterating the pylon fields, weakening the stitches that held reality together. Call's briefing made clear to Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed that Abaddon must be denied his prize. The largest of the Cadian regions, where the pylons stood, the Elysion Fields near Khazar-Craft, had to be defended at all costs. The Imperial Fist's mobile star fortress Phalanx was moved into geostationary orbit above the pylon fields, while Creed established trenchworks and aegis lines across the Elysion Fields. Above ground, the Cadian troops waited alongside the Sisters of Our Martyred Lady, while the remaining Space Marine forces from the Dark Angels, Black Templars, and Space Wolves joined into a single strike force. Belisarius Cawl and his tech adepts worked in the catacombs that existed below the pylon fields on the artifacts themselves. Cawl hoped to find a way to strengthen the pylon's anti-warp properties. But Abaddon had sworn to crush Cadia's last resistance himself. Even as Cawl worked desperately to modify the pylon network, Chaos landing craft dropped onto the Elysion Fields. Their ramps dropped down, and they released their cargoes of Black Legion heretic Astartes and swarming Chaos cultists, all led by the Despoiler himself. As Abaddon's second ground assault on Cadia began, the Cadian Astra Militarum troops, under Ursarkar Creed's command, withdrew into the catacombs. Abaddon and his elite force of black-armored Chaos Terminators followed in close pursuit. At the same time, Cawl finally gained a full understanding of the pylon network's function, with the assistance of the Necron Overlord Trazyn the Inifinite, and he activated the relics. It was then that the western wall of the vast cavern where Cawl worked collapsed, as Abaddon's Terminators broke into the underground labyrinth. The Despoiler himself was in the lead, his demon sword Dracnian cleaving through armor and bone with equal ease. To slow the Chaos assault, Trazyn hurled a Necron device called Tesseract Labyrinth into the fray, releasing several of the most prized specimens in his collection from stasis. These included a force of Ultramarines kept captive since the Horus Heresy, a group of Salamander Space Marines, and a member of the Adeptus Custodes. But the most important was Katarina Grafax, an Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus who had been captured by Trazyn centuries before. She surveyed the subterranean battle from its fringes, calculating how best to aid the cause of the Emperor in this unexpected new situation. Elsewhere, Abaddon noticed Cawl at work on the pylons. The Despoiler was suddenly filled with uncertainty, as he realized that the Adeptus Mechanicus might at last have unraveled his true plan. Fearing that the Imperials might thwart his design, Abaddon ordered his sorcerers to breach the Immaterium and call forth his demonic allies. Cadia had stood too long, and he was determined to end its resistance by ripping out its beating heart. Ursarkar E. Creed would die by his hand. As Abaddon moved towards the Lord Castellan, golden light suddenly spilled into the chamber as the ceiling collapsed. Saint Celestine and her resurrected Sisters of Battle had come to face the Despoiler. Lightning suddenly crackled from all of the pylons present on the Elysion fields. Cawl had succeeded. Black energy poured from every pylon on Cadia, converging in the upper atmosphere and searing across the stars like a lance aimed at the heart of the Eye of Terror. Incredibly, impossibly, the Eye of Terror began to shrink. At the same time, all those with a connection to the Immaterium began to weaken, including Abaddon's demons and Saint Celestine and her two champions. Now the stronger, Abaddon moved to kill the living saint, but Katarina Grafax chose that moment to intervene. A potent psyker, the Inquisitor used all her power to hold back the killing blow, despite the weakness she felt as her connection to the warp failed. Seeing his chance, Creed launched a counterattack with his Cadians and briefly battled the Despoiler himself. But Abaddon proved the stronger, and Creed lost an arm. As Abaddon moved to at last finish off the Lord Castellan with the clawed fingers of his Talon of Horus, Celestine managed to find the strength to ram her shining sword through his back. The talon snapped open, and Creed was released. Badly wounded, Abaddon realized he was running out of time as the pylons worked against his plan. His desire to kill Creed was an unnecessary act of vanity. With hatred in his heart for the living saint, Abaddon gave the order to withdraw and teleported back to his flagship. He had set Cadia's fate in motion before he had ever even made planetfall. Above, the Black Fleet's engineers, its warpsmiths, received the order they had been waiting for. They had secretly attached plasma drives to the fragments of the disabled Will of Eternity. With a blast of thrust from these drives, the remains of the Blackstone fortress plunged into the atmosphere. With the wind howling about it, the artificial meteor impacted Cadia. The devastation unleashed by that strike knocked Cadia from its orbit and caused the pylons across the planet to collapse as tectonic stress ripped the world apart. The dark beam of energy projected by the pylons died. The Eye of Terror pulsed once and then began to grow, reaching out to embrace Cadia and continue its spread across the galaxy. Demons spilled forth onto the planet in vast numbers as the power of the warp in local space surged. The Imperium's greatest fortress was lost. The Despoiler had won. Yet, there was still hope. Saint Celestine led the battered Imperial forces out of the catacombs, as she and Greyfax took charge of what rapidly became an evacuation. As the Imperial transports soared into the hellish skies, Creed and his Cadians fought and died to protect their flight. The Sisters of Our Martyred Lady and the Space Marines were the last to depart, crowded with the Living Saint and the Inquisitor in the stinking, bloody holds of whatever transports the remaining Imperial capital ships could spare. Ursarkar E. Creed fully expected to die with his world, but he was unwillingly rescued by Trazyn the Infinite in another of his Tesseract labyrinths. As the Necron Overlord left the shattered corpse of Cadia behind, he was pleased despite the defeat. The Lord Castellan would make an excellent addition to his collection. The ragtag Imperial fleet of survivors was led by the Phalanx and the Iron Revenant, Belisarius Cawl's powerful Arch Mechanicus. The refugees fled Cadia for the outer system, hoping to get far enough from the Eye of Terror's influence to be able to make a warp jump. But Abaddon's seer, Zaraphiston, warned the War Master that Cawl's vessel was carrying a powerful Imperial artifact that could prove detrimental to his plans. The vengeful spirit gave pursuit, and eventually crippled the Iron Revenant's Geller field. There would be no escape into the warp for the Imperials. Trusting in the Emperor, it was Celestine who once more offered the way forward. She indicated the ice moon of Clasis, the furthest world in the Cadian system. With absolute certainty, she promised that salvation could be found within its ice. The Imperials shuttled down to Clasis and began to trudge through the frigid world's snow. Cawl followed, bringing the secret relic he had protected aboard his vessel with him in a mobile auto-reliquary. Abaddon's forces pursued, further whittling down the survivors of Cadia. Cawl joined Celestine and Greyfax at the head of the company, sure that he was marching to his death for the sake of a promise he had made to a Primarch 10 millennia before. Suddenly, the ice exploded in a burst of dazzling light. Jet bikes and Craftworld Aeldari grav tanks emerged from Clasis's frigid mists to strike hard and fast at the pursuing Black Legion troops. Before long, the Chaos forces were driven back by the arrivals, which included troops from Craftworld's Ulfway, Bieltan, and several others, as well as Drakari troops from the Dark City of Camorra, all operating in concert. They were led by an Aeldari woman who wore the garments of a priestess from before the Aeldari Empire had fallen. Celestine had been right. Salvation had been found on Clasis. The woman was Yvraine, the leader of a new Aeldari faction called the Ynnari, the Reborn, the servants of Iniad, the Aeldari god of the dead. Some months before, with the aid of the Harlequins, the Farseer Eldrad Ulthran had sought to awaken Iniad within the warp early, without having to first sacrifice the life of every Aeldari. Due to interference in the ritual performed on the crystal moon of Coheria by the Death Watch, the ritual had only partially succeeded in awakening Iniad. The new Aeldari god had immediately reached across the galaxy to find a prophet and champion, and he had chosen Yvraine. She had been born on Craftworld Bieltan and followed many of the paths of the Asuryani way. She found none to her liking, and eventually made her way to Camorra, where she fought in the Drukhari's gladiatorial arenas, thus forging links on both sides of the Aeldari divide. Yvraine was slain in battle there by a priestess of the crone goddess Morai Heg, but Iniad's power had resurrected her at the moment of his awakening. She became his instrument in the mortal realm, determined to unite all the Aeldari factions around their one chance of salvation. The power of Iniad could shield the essences of the craft world Asuryani and Drukhari alike from Slaaneish's soul thirst. The god of the dead thus offered an alternative to the Asuryani spirit stones and the Drukhari sadistic cruelty to save his people. Joined by the Vizarch, a masterful Drukhari warrior, Yvraine began a quest to fully awaken her god so he could defeat Slaanesh forever. This required finding 5 Aeldari artifacts called the Crone Swords, said to have been forged from the fingers of the goddess Morai Heg's severed hand by the smith god Vol. With these blades in her possession, Yvraine could focus Iniad's consciousness into full wakefulness using a ritual known as the Seventh Path. But for the Aeldari to survive the chaos onslaught of Abaddon long enough to complete their quest, they needed the Imperium to bear the brunt of the fighting to come. And for the Imperium to triumph, the humans needed a new leader. Iniad had led Yvraine over the course of many tribulations to the imperial survivors of Cadia on Clasis. She now offered them an alliance. Katarina Grafax was skeptical, knowing that the Aeldari only ever acted in their own interest. But Celestine supported an alliance, believing it was the Emperor's will, and with little choice, the others agreed. The Ynnari held off the Black Legion long enough for the Imperials to slip into the Webway portal on Clasis, and the Aeldari followed. Together, the new allies made their way to their next destination, the Ultramarines' realm of Ultramar. But Abaddon didn't give up his pursuit after losing his quarry at Clasis. Still fearing what Belisarius Cawl planned, he sent a Black Legion fleet to invade Ultramar. By the time the Ynnari and the Imperials emerged from the Webway on the world of Laphis in the Macragge system, the Ultramarines were already consumed by war. Making themselves known to the Ultramarines, the survivors of Cadia and the Ynnari were shuttled to Macragge itself. They were granted an audience with Marneus Calgar, the Ultramarines chapter master, and his chief officers at their fortress monastery, the Fortress of Hera. The party was viewed with great suspicion by the Ultramarines for traveling with the Aeldari, always known to be treacherous. In front of Calgar, Belisarius Cawl pointed to his auto-reliquary and claimed to possess a technology that could resurrect the Ultramarines' mortally wounded Primarch Roboute Guilliman. The outcry was immediate, as the Ultramarines declared the Archmagos guilty of vile heresy. Calgar looked to his chief librarian, Varro Tigurius, for counsel. Tigurius revealed that he had suffered from recurring visions of the fall of Cadia and the Black Legion's attack on Ultramar. He proclaimed that the Cadian survivors were intended to play a part in the events to come. Tigurius vouched for their presence, even that of the alien Aeldari, and believed their arrival to be the Emperor's will made manifest. Trusting his chief librarian's counsel, Calgar allowed the small party to travel to the Temple of Correction, where Roboute Guilliman himself sat enthroned within a stasis field. The fatal wound made by the demon Primarch Fulgrim's toxic blade 10,000 years before was still visible. Belisarius Cawl explained that before Guilliman had been wounded, he had been the Primarch's ally in several massive projects intended to strengthen the Imperium. He now intended to complete the first of his tasks. The Archmagos opened the auto-reliquary and revealed a special suit of power armor, the Armor of Fate. Its advanced life support systems had the ability to heal the Primarch's mortal wound. Yvraine then revealed the Ynnari's purpose in coming to Macragge. Cawl's technology alone was not enough to resurrect the Primarch. Only the power of Inied over life and death could defeat the chaos toxin that had poisoned Guilliman. As the strange pair set to work, combining technology and the raw power of the warp, the stained armor-glass of the shrine's ceiling exploded inward. An Ultramarines Thunderhawk gunship slammed into the shrine's floor and skidded out of control, followed by 10 Dreadclaw drop pods. Spilling from within came a flood of Black Legion Chaos Space Marines. They were making one final, all-out attempt to prevent the resurrection of the Primarch. It was too little, too late. The Black Legionaries were only yards away when the rune panels on Cawl's auto-reliquary suddenly flickered from red to green. Yvraine opened her eyes, her transfer of Inied's power complete. Where before Roboute Guilliman had sat pale and unmoving, now he stood awake and alert to the danger. Cawl revealed his second gift, the Emperor's Sword, which had sat for 10 millennia in its scabbard by the Golden Throne. At Guilliman's touch, it burst into flames, and he set to work, aiding the Imperials in throwing back Abaddon's hounds. Wherever Guilliman moved, death followed. He was Wrath incarnate, a demigod whose foes fell before his blade, like wheat before the scythe. The first enemies of the Imperium to face the fury of a Primarch in 10,000 years, the Black Legionaries tried to flee. Not a single one of them escaped the Fortress of Hera alive. In humanity's darkest hour, the Emperor's avenging son had returned.